Most people don't suffer because life is too hard. They suffer because their mind is always in the wrong place. When something goes wrong, they replay it, analyze it, complain about it, and carry it everywhere they go. They wake up thinking about the problem. They go to sleep thinking about the problem. And without realizing it, they train their mind to live inside the problem instead of moving beyond it. I learned this the hard way. There was a period in my life when everything felt stuck. Work wasn't going the way I expected. Plans kept falling apart, and every conversation in my head sounded the same. Why is this happening? Why is it unfair? Why can't things just work out? I thought I was being responsible by thinking so much about the problem. In reality, I was slowly draining my own energy. What finally changed things wasn't a new opportunity or a sudden breakthrough. It was a quiet realization. I noticed that the moments I felt strongest weren't when the problem disappeared, but when I stopped feeding it. The moment I asked myself, what can I do next? Something shifted. My mind felt lighter. My body felt calmer. And for the first time in a long while, I felt movement again. I've seen the same pattern in people around me. A close friend once lost a job they depended on. At first, every conversation was about blame, fear, and regret. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing changed. But one day, they made a small decision. Instead of talking about what went wrong, they focused on what they could control. Updating skills, reaching out to people, taking small steps. The problem didn't vanish overnight. But their life started moving forward again. This is the truth most people never hear. Problems don't destroy your life. Your focus does. Where your attention goes, your energy follows. And when all your energy is locked inside what's wrong, there's nothing left for what could be right. This video is not about pretending problems don't exist. It's not about fake positivity or ignoring reality. Problems are real. Pain is real. But staying mentally trapped inside them is a choice you can unlearn. Your mind can be trained, just like a muscle, to look for solutions instead of looping through fear, anger, and doubt. In the next 60 minutes, you'll learn how to retrain that focus. You'll learn how to shift your thinking in real situations when emotions are high and clarity feels far away. These are practical tools, grounded in real experiences that you can apply to your work, your relationships, and your inner life. This process is not fast, but it is real. And once you feel the difference, you will never approach problems the same way again. Change does not begin when life becomes easier. It begins when your inner dialogue becomes stronger, calmer, and more intentional. That is the skill you are here to build. This is where momentum starts, quietly, from the inside. It begins with attention, discipline, and a decision made today, right now, without excuses, starting today together. If you've ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or exhausted by your own thoughts, this audiobook is for you. Stay with me. Listen closely. Chapter 1. Why focusing on problems keeps you stuck. Most people believe that if they think about a problem long enough, they will eventually solve it. They sit with it, replay it, analyze it from every angle, and assume that this mental effort is progress. But in most cases, it isn't. It's a trap. And once you fall into it, it quietly keeps you exactly where you are. When something goes wrong, your mind naturally zooms in on the problem. That's how the brain is wired. It scans for danger, mistakes, and threats because, historically, that kept us alive. The issue is that the modern problems you face are not predators or immediate threats. They are situations that require clarity, action, and calm thinking. Yet your brain treats them the same way. It locks on to what's wrong and refuses to let go. I've seen this pattern play out countless times, both in my own life and in the lives of people close to me. A colleague once came to me frustrated about their career. Every conversation sounded identical. The company was unfair. The timing was bad. Opportunities were limited. They could explain the problem in perfect detail. They had thought about it for months. But when I asked a simple question, "What are you doing differently this week?" the room went quiet. There was no answer. Not because they were lazy, but because all their mental energy was being consumed by the problem itself. This is what focusing on problems really does. It gives you the illusion of control while quietly stealing your ability to move. You feel busy in your head, but nothing changes in your life. The longer you stay in this state, the more familiar it becomes. Your mind learns this pattern. It starts to believe that worrying is productive, that stress means you care, and that thinking deeply about what's wrong somehow makes you responsible. Over time, this becomes your default mode. Something goes wrong, and instantly your thoughts spiral. You replay conversations, you imagine worst-case scenarios, you search for someone or something to blame. And while all of this is happening, time passes. There was a moment in my own life when I realized how dangerous this pattern was. I was dealing with a setback that felt personal. I kept asking myself why it happened and what I should have done differently. Days turned into weeks. I wasn't resting, and I wasn't acting. I was stuck in between. One night I caught myself mentally rehearsing the same thoughts I'd been repeating for days. Nothing new. No insight. Just noise. That's when it hit me. This wasn't problem-solving. This was self-sabotage disguised as thinking. Here's the hard truth most people avoid. Problems do not trap you. Your attention does. When all your focus is locked on what's wrong, you leave no space for what's possible. The mind can only hold so much at once. If it's filled with frustration, fear, and blame, there's no room left for solutions. Another reason focusing on problems keeps you stuck is emotional reinforcement. Every time you revisit a problem, you re-experience the emotion tied to it. Anger, shame, anxiety, helplessness. These emotions are powerful, and the brain remembers them. Over time, the problem becomes emotionally charged, not intellectually clear. At that point, you're no longer thinking, you're reacting. And reaction never leads to progress. And I once watched a friend go through a painful breakup. At first, the pain was understandable, but months later, the story never changed. Same memories, same questions, same frustration. The relationship was over, but the problem was still alive in their mind. Eventually, the pain became familiar. It became part of their identity. And as long as their focus stayed there, nothing new could enter their life. Not growth, not healing, not direction. This is why some people stay stuck for years without realizing it. They don't lack intelligence. They don't lack effort. They lack a shift in focus. They are solving the wrong problem. Instead of asking how to move forward, they keep asking why they're hurting. There's also a subtle comfort in focusing on problems. Solutions require responsibility. They require action. They require you to accept that even if something wasn't your fault, it's still your responsibility to respond. Problems, on the other hand, allow you to stay still. They justify waiting. They make inaction feel reasonable. But staying still has a cost. The longer you focus on what's wrong, the more your confidence erodes. You begin to doubt your ability to change things. You start to believe that life is happening to you, not with you. And slowly, without a clear moment of decision, you become passive. The goal of this chapter is not to make you feel guilty for focusing on problems. This is human. The goal is awareness. Because you cannot change a pattern you don't see. Once you understand that your mind has been trained to obsess over problems, you can begin to retrain it. Here is a simple exercise to bring this into your awareness. Think about one problem that has been taking up most of your mental space recently. Ask yourself honestly, how much time have I spent thinking about this, and how much time have I spent taking even one small action toward improving it? The answer to that question will tell you everything you need to know. Focusing on problems feels natural, but it is not neutral. It shapes your identity, your energy, and your future. If you want movement in your life, the The first step is not solving everything at once. It is recognizing where your attention has been living, because where your focus goes, your life follows. Chapter 2. The cost of living in problem mode. Focusing on problems does more than slow you down. It quietly drains you. And the most dangerous part is that you rarely notice it happening. There is no dramatic collapse, no single moment where everything falls apart. Instead, there is a slow erosion of energy, confidence, and clarity. You keep going, but you feel heavier every day. When your mind lives in problem mode, it is constantly alert, always scanning, always bracing. Even when nothing is actively going wrong, part of you is waiting for it to happen. This state might feel familiar, but it is not sustainable. Your nervous system was not designed to stay tense for weeks, months, or years at a time. I remember a time when my days looked fine from the outside. I was working, showing up, doing what was expected. But internally, my mind never rested. Every quiet moment was filled with mental noise. What if this fails? What if I made the wrong decision? What if I never get out of this situation? I thought I was being cautious. In reality, I was exhausting myself. This is the first hidden cost of problem mode: mental fatigue. When you spend most of your attention replaying what's wrong, your brain is constantly burning fuel. And unlike physical tiredness, mental fatigue doesn't always tell you to stop. It just makes everything feel harder. Decisions take longer. Simple tasks feel heavy. Motivation fades, not because you're lazy, but because you're depleted. The second cost is emotional exhaustion. Problems are rarely neutral. They come with feelings attached: fear, anger, regret, shame. When you revisit a problem again and again, you also revisit those emotions. Over time, your baseline emotional state shifts. You become more irritable, more sensitive, less patient. Small things start to feel overwhelming because you're already carrying too much inside. I saw this clearly in a former co-worker. They were talented, capable, and respected. But they were constantly frustrated with how things worked. Every lunch break turned into a discussion about what was broken, unfair, or inefficient. At first, it felt like bonding. Over time, it became draining, not just for others, but for them. Their energy dropped. Their creativity disappeared. Eventually, they stopped being seen as someone who brings solutions and started being known as someone who brings problems. Without realizing it, problem mode changed how others perceived them. That leads to the third cost: reputation and relationships. So people don't just respond to what you say, they respond to the energy you bring. When you are stuck in problem mode, it shows up in your tone, your body language, and your conversations. You may not intend to complain, but your focus leaks out. And over time, people feel it. Strong relationships grow around forward movement, around shared effort, around a sense of possibility. When every interaction circles back to what's wrong, others begin to pull away, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to help someone who is mentally stuck in place. The fourth cost is confidence. This one is subtle, but powerful. Every time you focus on a problem without acting, your brain learns a lesson. It learns that you see obstacles but don't move. That lesson accumulates. Slowly, your self-trust weakens. You stop believing that your actions matter. You start to feel like life is something you endure instead of something you shape. I've experienced this myself. There was a point where I hesitated before taking even small steps, not because they were difficult, but because I had trained myself to stay in my head. Action felt risky. Thinking felt safe. But safety without movement slowly turns into stagnation. Another cost of living in problem mode is distorted perception. When your attention is locked onto what's wrong, you stop seeing what's working. Progress becomes invisible. Opportunities pass unnoticed. Your world shrinks to the size of your frustration. This is not because reality is only negative, but because focus filters reality. You don't see everything. You see what you train yourself to see. And this distortion is why two people can live in the same circumstances and experience completely different lives. One sees constraints, the other sees options. One feels trapped, the other feels challenged. The difference is not intelligence or luck, it's attention. There is also a physical cost. Chronic stress, even when it comes from thinking rather than events, affect the body. Sleep becomes lighter. Muscles stay tense. Breathing becomes shallow. Over time, the body mirrors the mind. A mind stuck on problems creates a body that struggles to recover. A close friend of mine once told me something that stayed with me. They said, "I realized I wasn't tired from doing too much. I was tired from thinking too much about things I wasn't changing." That sentence captured the heart of problem mode perfectly. Effort without direction drains you. Thought without action weighs you down. It's important to understand that noticing these costs is not about judging yourself. Many people live this way because no one ever taught them another option. Society often praises overthinking, worrying, and constant analysis as signs of seriousness and intelligence. But seriousness without movement is just stagnation dressed up as effort. Here's a simple way to check if problem mode has been costing you more than you realize. Pay attention to your inner dialogue over the next day. Notice how often your thoughts circle around what's wrong versus what you can do. Notice how your body feels after those thoughts. Heavier or lighter, tense or calm. The contrast will be clear. The purpose of this chapter is not to push you into action yet. That comes later. Right now, the goal is awareness of the price you've been paying. Because once you clearly see the cost, staying in problem mode no longer feels comfortable, and discomfort, when understood, becomes the doorway to change. Living in problem mode is expensive. It costs energy, clarity, connection, and confidence. And the longer you stay there, the more it takes to leave. But the good news is simple. The moment you shift your focus, even slightly, the cost begins to drop. And that shift starts with recognizing that what feels familiar may be quietly holding you back. Chapter 3. How Strong Minds See Problems Differently. At some point, everyone faces the same question, whether they realize it or not. When something goes wrong, do you turn inward and freeze, or do you turn forward and move? This single difference explains why some people grow stronger under pressure, while others slowly lose momentum. It's not because strong-minded people have fewer problems. It's because they see problems through a completely different lens. Most people see a problem as proof that something is wrong with them or with life. They experience it as a wall, something blocking the path, something unfair, heavy, and personal. Their first instinct is to ask, "Why is this happening to me?" That question feels natural, but it leads nowhere. It keeps the mind anchored in the past and locked inside emotion. And strong minds ask a different kind of question, not because they are cold or detached, but because they have learned what works. Instead of asking why, they ask what now. That shift may seem small, but it changes everything. One question looks backward, the other opens a door forward. I once met someone who embodied this difference perfectly. A friend of a friend lost nearly everything when a business collapsed. Money, status, confidence, all gone within a year. Anyone would understand anger or despair in that situation, and for a short time they felt it too. But what stood out was what happened next. While others kept revisiting the story of what went wrong, this person quietly began asking new questions. What skills do I still have? What can I rebuild with what's left? What's the smallest step I can take this week? And they didn't deny the pain. They acknowledged it and then refused to live inside it. That refusal wasn't loud. It wasn't motivational. It was practical. And within a year, their life looked completely different. Not because the past changed, but because their focus did. This is one of the core differences between problem-focused thinking and solution-focused thinking. Problem-focused thinking seeks understanding. Solution-focused thinking seeks movement. Understanding can be valuable, but only to a point. Beyond that point, it becomes a loop. Strong minds understand something simple. A problem does not require your identity. It requires your response. When you merge who you are with what went wrong, the problem becomes heavier. When you separate yourself from it, it becomes manageable. So another key difference is how strong minds relate to emotion. Most people believe they must feel better before they act. Strong minds reverse that order. They act first, then allow their emotions to catch up. They don't wait for clarity to appear. They create clarity through movement. I learned this lesson during a period when I felt uncertain about my direction. I was waiting to feel confident before making a change. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing improved. One day, almost out of frustration, I took a small step without feeling ready. No grand plan, no certainty. Just action. That single decision didn't solve everything, but it changed my mental state immediately. Action shifted my focus away from doubt and toward possibility. Confidence followed later. Strong minds also treat problems as information, not as threats. A threat activates fear. Information activates strategy. When you see a problem as information, you stop asking emotional questions and start asking useful ones. What does this reveal? What needs to change? What is no longer working? This doesn't mean strong-minded people are optimistic all the time. It means they are precise. They don't exaggerate the problem or minimize it. They see it clearly, then decide how to respond. Precision keeps emotions from taking over. There is another important distinction. Weak problem-focused thinking tends to be abstract. It sounds like this. My life is a mess. Nothing ever works out. Everything feels overwhelming. Strong, solution-focused thinking is specific. It narrows the lens. This one situation is not working. This one habit needs to change. This one decision is within my control. Specificity creates power. When a problem is vague, it feels massive. When it is defined clearly, it becomes actionable. Strong minds train themselves to break large problems into small, controllable parts. They don't try to fix everything. They fix one thing. A close colleague once struggled with constant stress at work. They described their situation as unbearable. But when we talked deeper, the issue wasn't everything. It was one recurring responsibility that drained them. Once that was identified, the solution became obvious. Boundaries were set, a conversation was had. Stress dropped. The problem didn't disappear. It shrank. This is how strong minds work. They reduce emotional noise and increase clarity. They understand that clarity is not something you wait for. It's something you create by asking better questions and taking smaller steps. Strong minds also accept something most people resist. They accept responsibility without self-blame. They don't waste time arguing whether something is fair. They focus on what is theirs to handle now. Responsibility gives them agency. Blame takes it away. There is a quiet confidence that comes from this mindset. Not arrogance, not denial. Confidence rooted in the knowledge that no matter what happens, they can respond. That belief doesn't come from positive thinking. It comes from experience, from seeing themselves move forward again and again. Here's a simple exercise to begin training this way of thinking. Now think of a current problem in your life. Write it down in one sentence, without emotion, without explanation, just the facts. Then write one question beneath it. What is one action I can take in the next 24 hours that improves this by even 1%? That question alone shifts your mind out of problem mode and into solution mode. Strong minds are not free from problems. They are free from paralysis. They don't live inside what went wrong. They live inside what can be done next. And that difference, practiced daily, is what slowly turns challenges into stepping stones instead of dead ends. Chapter 4. Training your brain to ask better questions. Your mind always follows the questions you ask it. Whether you realize it or not, every question points your attention in a certain direction. Some questions keep you stuck. Others quietly pull you forward. The difference between a problem-focused life and a solution-focused life often comes down to this single habit. Most people don't notice the questions running in their head. They sound automatic, almost invisible. Why did this happen to me? Why is this so hard? Why can't people change? These questions feel natural, but they all share one thing in common. They keep your attention locked inside the problem. When you ask a question that has no useful answer, your brain still tries to respond. It searches memory, emotion, and imagination. It produces stories, explanations, and blame. The result is mental activity without progress. You feel busy inside, but nothing moves outside. I used to live in this loop without realizing it. Whenever something went wrong, my mind went straight to analysis. I replayed conversations. I imagined alternate outcomes. I searched for the moment where things went off track. It felt responsible, even intelligent, but eventually I noticed something uncomfortable. The more I analyzed, the less I acted. My questions were sharpening the problem, not dissolving it. The shift began when I encountered a simple idea. Your brain is a tool, not a judge. It responds to instruction. If you ask it vague, emotional questions, it gives you vague, emotional answers. If you ask it precise, practical questions, it gives you direction. Strong minds understand this. They don't waste energy asking questions that lead nowhere. They train themselves to ask questions that produce movement, not because they suppress emotion, but because they respect their attention. One of the most powerful changes you can make is replacing why questions with how and what questions. Why questions tend to look backward. They dig into the past. How and what questions look forward. They invite action. Consider the difference. Why am I always stuck? Versus, what is one thing I can change right now? The first question has no clear answer and creates frustration. The second question demands a response, even a small one. I saw this shift clearly in a friend who was overwhelmed by financial stress. For months, every conversation sounded the same. Why is everything so expensive? Why does this always happen to me? And the stress grew heavier each week. Then one day, almost accidentally, the questions changed. What expenses can I reduce this month? How can I increase my income slightly? Nothing dramatic happened overnight, but momentum returned. The problem shrank because the questions changed. This is how the brain works. It moves in the direction you point it. When you ask better questions, you give it a map instead of a maze. There are 3 core questions that consistently pull the mind out of problem mode and into solution mode. The first is simple. What is in my control right now? This question cuts through noise. It separates reality from imagination. You may not control outcomes, other people, or timing, but you always control your next action. The second question is equally powerful. What is one small step I can take? Not the perfect step. Not the complete solution. One small step. This question removes pressure and reduces resistance. It tells your brain that progress does not require certainty. The third question is often overlooked. What can I learn from this? Learning transforms pain into information. It turns failure into feedback. When the mind shifts into learning mode, it stops fighting reality and starts extracting value from it. I began using these questions during moments of stress, especially when emotions were high. At first, it felt forced. My mind wanted to return to familiar patterns. But over time, something changed. The questions became automatic, and with them came a sense of calm clarity I had never experienced before. Another important aspect of asking better questions is timing. When emotions are intense, your brain is not designed for complex reasoning. That's why strong minds pause before questioning. They create a small gap between feeling and thinking. A few deep breaths, a moment of stillness, then the right question, This pause matters. Without it, even good questions can become emotional traps. With it, questions become tools. There is also a difference between questions that empower and questions that judge. What did I do wrong? Carries judgment. What can I do differently next time? Carries possibility. The words matter because your brain responds to tone as much as meaning. Training your brain to ask better questions does not mean you never feel frustration or doubt. It means those feelings no longer control your direction. They become signals, not commands. Here is a practical exercise you can apply today. The next time you catch yourself stuck in a mental loop, write down the question running in your head. Then rewrite it so it leads to action. Turn, "Why is this so hard?" into "What would make this slightly easier?" Turn, "Why did this fail?" into "What can I adjust?" This may feel small, but it is not. Over time, these questions reshape your inner dialogue, and your inner dialogue shapes your life. Strong minds are not smarter or luckier. They are more disciplined with their attention. They know that every question is a choice, and when you choose questions that lead forward, your mind follows. Chapter 5. From Complaining to Creating. Solutions. Complaining feels harmless. Sometimes it even feels necessary. It gives you a moment of release, a sense of being heard, a temporary feeling that you are not alone in your frustration. But if you are not careful, complaining becomes a habit. And like most habits, it shapes the way you think long after the moment has passed. Most people don't realize how often they complain. It doesn't always sound dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A sigh, a sarcastic comment, a repeated story about what's unfair or annoying. Over time, these small expressions train your mind to focus on what's wrong by default. There was a period when I didn't think of myself as a complainer at all. I believed I was just being honest. I talked about work stress, difficult people, missed opportunities. The stories were real, since the feelings were real. But one day, someone close to me said something that stopped me. They said, "Every time you talk about this, you sound more tired." That was hard to hear, but it was true. My words were reinforcing my exhaustion. Complaining keeps problems alive. Every time you repeat the story, your brain relives the emotion. Anger stays sharp. Frustration stays fresh. Instead of processing and moving on, you rehearse the problem. The mind learns that this is where attention belongs. This is why complaining rarely leads to solutions. It feels like action, but it isn't. It's expression without direction. And while expression has its place, direction is what creates change. I once worked with someone who complained constantly about leadership. At first, their insights were sharp. They noticed real issues. But over time, nothing new came from it. The same complaints, repeated week after week. Eventually, people stopped listening. Not because the problems disappeared, but because there was no movement. Complaints without solutions lose credibility. This is one of the hidden dangers of chronic complaining. It doesn't just affect your mindset, it affects how others perceive you. People naturally gravitate toward those who bring clarity and action. When you focus only on what's wrong, you become associated with stagnation, even if that's not who you are. Strong minds understand this distinction. They don't suppress their frustration, but they don't dwell in it either. They process it, then pivot. They ask a simple question: what can be done about this? This leads to one of the most powerful personal rules you can adopt. No complaint without a solution. And this does not mean every solution has to be perfect or even successful. It means that if you notice a problem, your next move is constructive. When I first tried this rule, it felt uncomfortable. I caught myself mid-complaint and had nothing to offer. That silence was revealing. It showed me how often I was talking without thinking about direction. Over time, the rule trained my mind to shift automatically. Instead of venting, I began asking what could change. A friend of mine applied this rule in their workplace. Instead of pointing out issues in meetings, They started bringing one possible improvement with every concern. The change was subtle but powerful. Their ideas were taken more seriously. Their confidence grew. And interestingly, they complained less even outside of work. The habit rewired their focus. Complaining also creates a false sense of connection. People bond over shared frustration, but that bond is fragile. It keeps everyone facing the problem instead of facing forward together. Strong relationships deepen when people work towards something, not when they stay stuck together. This doesn't mean you should never talk about difficulties. The difference is intention. Are you sharing to process and move forward, or are you sharing to relive the emotion? One builds clarity, the other builds weight. Another subtle cost of complaining is how it affects your inner dialogue. The way you speak out loud often mirrors the way you think silently. When your outer language is filled with problems, your inner world follows. Over time, this becomes your mental environment. Shifting from complaining to creating solutions begins with awareness. Notice when you start repeating the same story. Notice how your body feels when you do. Tense, heavy, drained. Then notice how it feels when you talk about action instead. Lighter, more grounded, more in control. One practical exercise is the 24-hour challenge. For one full day, every time you feel the urge to complain, pause and ask yourself one question. What is one small thing I can do about this? If there is no action available, practice letting it go without rehearsal. This is harder than it sounds, but it is powerful. Another useful shift is to change your language. Instead of saying, "This is a problem," say, "This needs a solution." That small change signals your brain to switch modes. Language directs attention. Attention directs behavior. Strong minds do not eliminate frustration. They eliminate waste. They refuse to spend energy on expressions that go nowhere. They understand that energy is limited and focus is precious. By reducing complaining, you create space. Space for thought. Space for creativity. Space for action. And in that space, solutions begin to appear naturally. This chapter is not about becoming silent or emotionless. It is about becoming intentional. Every problem you face asks the same question in return. Will you feed it with words, or will you shape it with action? The answer to that question determines whether you stay stuck or move forward. Chapter 6. Small actions that retrain your focus. Most people believe that change requires a big decision, a perfect plan, or a dramatic moment of motivation. Because of that belief, they wait. They wait to feel ready, confident, or inspired. And while they wait, nothing moves. Strong minds understand something different. They know that focus is not changed by intention alone. It is changed by action, especially small, consistent action. When your mind is stuck in problem mode, large solutions feel overwhelming. You look at the distance between where you are and where you want to be, and your brain shuts down. This is why small actions matter. They bypass resistance. They give your mind evidence that movement is possible. I experienced this firsthand during a period when I felt completely unmotivated. I knew what I wanted to change, but the gap felt too large. Every time I thought about taking action, my mind returned to the problem. The pressure of fixing everything was paralyzing. What finally helped was lowering the bar. I stopped asking what would solve the situation and started asking what would slightly improve it. That shift changed my behavior immediately. Instead of planning for hours, I acted for minutes. I sent one email. I organized one task. I had one uncomfortable conversation. Each action was small, but each one pulled my focus away from the problem and toward progress. Small actions work because they give your brain feedback. The brain learns through experience, not theory. When you take even a small step, your nervous system relaxes. It receives a signal that you are not helpless. That signal reduces anxiety and increases clarity. And I saw this clearly in a family member who struggled with their health. They felt overwhelmed by advice, routines, and expectations. Every plan felt like too much. Instead of overhauling everything, they committed to one simple action, a short walk each day. No pressure, no rules, just consistency. Over time, that walk became a habit. Energy improved. Confidence returned. Other healthy behaviors followed naturally. The focus shifted from the problem to the process. This is how retraining your focus works. You don't argue with your mind. You show it a different pattern. Another reason small actions are powerful is that they anchor your attention in the present. Problems often live in the past or the future. Regret pulls you backward. Worry pulls you forward. Action brings you into now. And in the present, you have control. Strong minds are not obsessed with outcomes. They are committed to process. They understand that outcomes are shaped indirectly through repeated behavior. When you focus on the next small step, you remove the emotional weight attached to results. There is also an important relationship between action and identity. Every action you take sends a message to yourself about who you are. When you consistently act, even in small ways, you reinforce an identity of capability. When you avoid action, you reinforce an identity of hesitation. Identity shapes future behavior, which is why small actions compound over time. I once worked with someone who wanted to change careers but felt stuck for years. The idea of switching paths felt overwhelming. Instead of forcing a decision, they committed to one small action per week related to a new field, or reading, learning, reaching out. Within months, the path became clearer. The fear didn't vanish, but it stopped controlling their choices. Small actions also protect you from perfectionism. When the goal is to act small, mistakes lose their power. You are no longer trying to get everything right. You are simply moving. Movement builds clarity. Clarity builds confidence. One practical way to apply this is the next 5 minutes rule. When you feel stuck, don't ask what you should do today or this week. Ask what you can do in the next 5 minutes. Set a timer. Act. When the timer ends, stop if you want. Most of the time, momentum carries you forward. Another helpful practice is linking action to existing routines. Instead of creating new habits from scratch, attach small actions to what you already do. After you wake up, write one sentence about a solution. After lunch, take one step toward a task you've been avoiding. This reduces friction and increases consistency. Strong minds also understand that small actions are not about speed. They are about direction. You can move slowly and still be moving forward. Speed without direction leads to burnout. Direction with patience leads to progress. It's important to address one common misconception. Taking small actions does not mean thinking small. It means respecting the way the human mind changes. You're not lowering your standards, you are building a foundation. Notice how your focus shifts after action. The mind becomes quieter. Problems lose their emotional grip. Possibilities feel closer. This is not imagination. It is a neurological response. Action regulates emotion. To practice this today, choose one area of your life where you feel stuck. Don't try to solve it. Choose one small action that moves you one step forward. Do it without overthinking. Then notice how your mind responds. Small actions are not insignificant. They are training. Every time you act, you teach your brain where to focus. Over time, that training becomes automatic. You stop living inside problems and start living inside progress. Chapter 7. Staying in solution mode. When life gets hard, it's easy to focus on solutions when things are calm. The real test comes when life hits hard, when emotions rise, and when clarity disappears. In those moments, your mind wants to retreat to familiar patterns. It wants to replay the problem, assign blame, or freeze. This is where most people lose progress, not because they forgot what to do, but because they forgot how to respond under pressure. Strong minds do not avoid difficulty. They prepare for it. They understand that stress will happen and that emotions will surge. The difference is not the absence of reaction, but the speed at which they regain control. When something triggers you, your body reacts first. Heart rate increases. Breathing becomes shallow. Muscles tense. This physical response narrows your focus. Knows it's useful in emergencies, but destructive for problem solving. That's why the first step in staying in solution mode is not thinking. It's pausing. I learned this during a time when a sudden setback caught me off guard. My immediate reaction was emotional. Thoughts raced, scenarios multiplied. I wanted answers immediately, but every thought made things worse. Nothing felt clear. Eventually, I stopped trying to think my way out. I took a step back. I slowed my breathing. I gave myself a moment. That pause changed everything. It didn't solve the problem, but it restored my ability to choose my next step. Strong minds create space between stimulus and response. In that space, control returns. One simple framework that helps is pause, breathe, choose. Pause interrupts the emotional spiral. Breathing regulates the nervous system. Choosing reminds you that you still have agency. This process may take seconds, but it shifts your state. Breathing is especially powerful because it directly affects the body. Slow, deep breaths signal safety. Safety allows the mind to widen its focus. When the body feels threatened, the mind cannot think clearly. This is not weakness. It is biology. Once your body settles, the next challenge is resisting emotional decision-making. When emotions are high, decisions feel urgent. Strong minds resist this urge. They know that urgency is often a feeling, not a fact. I saw this lesson clearly in a close friend facing a serious conflict. They wanted to respond immediately, to defend themselves, to explain. Every impulse pointed toward reaction. Instead, they waited. They slept on it. The next day, the emotional charge had softened. The response they chose was calmer, clearer, and more effective. The outcome was better because the timing was better. Staying in solution mode also requires accepting discomfort. Solutions are rarely comfortable. They often involve difficult conversations, delayed gratification, or uncertainty. Problem mode, by contrast, can feel familiar and safe. Strong minds choose growth over comfort, even when it's uncomfortable. Another key skill is separating emotion from direction. Emotions tell you how you feel and not what to do. You can feel afraid and still act wisely. You can feel angry and still choose restraint. Strong minds do not wait for emotions to disappear. They act alongside them. There is also a difference between processing emotion and feeding it. Processing means acknowledging the feeling, understanding it, and letting it pass. Whereas feeding means replaying the story, reinforcing the reaction. Strong minds process, then move. I had to learn this distinction through experience. There were times when I believed I was processing, but I was actually rehearsing the problem. I kept the emotion alive by revisiting it. Once I noticed this, I began limiting how long I sat with a feeling before shifting to action. That boundary protected my focus. Another challenge during hard times is external influence. Other people's emotions, opinions, and reactions can pull you back into problem mode. Strong minds are selective about what they absorb. They listen, but they don't surrender their direction. This doesn't mean ignoring others. It means maintaining clarity. You can empathize without losing focus. You can hear feedback without spiraling into doubt. The one practical tool is to anchor yourself to a single guiding question during stressful periods. What is the most constructive thing I can do right now? This question cuts through noise. It grounds you in action. When life gets hard, progress may slow. That's normal. Strong minds adjust expectations without abandoning direction. They accept that some days are about maintenance, not growth. Staying in solution mode does not mean constant forward motion. It means not turning backward. There will be moments when you fall back into old patterns. That's part of learning. The goal is not perfection, it is recovery. How quickly do you return to solution mode after slipping into problem mode? That recovery time shortens with practice. To strengthen this skill, practice it during small stresses. Traffic, delays, minor disagreements. Use these moments as training. The way you handle small pressure prepares you for big pressure. At the end of the day, staying in solution mode is not about control over life. It is about control over response. Life will challenge you, emotions will rise. But your direction remains a choice. Strong minds don't escape difficulty. They move through it with intention. And every time they do, their confidence deepens. Not because life becomes easier, but because they trust themselves to respond wisely, even when it doesn't. Chapter 8. Making Solution-Focused Thinking. A daily habit. The most important truth about mindset is this. The way you think under pressure is not decided in the moment. It is decided by what you practice every day. When life becomes difficult, your mind does not rise to the level of your intentions. It falls to the level of your habits. That is why solution-focused thinking must become a daily discipline, not an occasional strategy. Many people understand the idea of focusing on solutions, but they treat it like a tool they only reach for when things break down. Strong minds treat it as a lifestyle. They train their attention when life is calm, so it responds automatically when life is chaotic. I learned this after realizing that insight alone was never enough. I could listen to audiobooks, read powerful ideas, and feel inspired, yet still fall back into old thinking patterns under stress. The problem wasn't knowledge, it was repetition. My mind simply returned to what it had practiced the most. The first step in building a solution-focused habit is setting the tone of your day. Mornings matter because your mind is most open before distractions take over. One simple question asked at the start of the day can shape your entire focus. What is one meaningful action I can take today? This question immediately points your attention forward. It tells your brain that today is about movement, not rumination. This action does not need to be impressive. It only needs to be intentional. Some days it might be a conversation. Other days it might be rest, reflection, or preparation. What matters is that your mind learns to associate each day with action rather than avoidance. Evenings matter just as much. At the end of the day, your brain reviews what you emphasize. If you focus only on mistakes or unfinished tasks, you reinforce a problem-centered identity. Instead, strong minds end the day by acknowledging one effective response. Not perfection, effectiveness. This teaches your brain that progress exists and that effort matters. A close friend of mine struggled for years with anxiety because every night ended with mental criticism. They began a simple practice of writing down one thing they handled better than before. At first, it felt forced. Over time, it became natural. Their anxiety didn't disappear, but it lost its dominance. Their focus shifted from fear to capability. Daily habits work because they remove the need for constant motivation. You don't have to decide how to think each time a problem appears. You already have a structure. Structure creates freedom. Another key part of making solution-focused thinking a habit is protecting your mental environment. Your focus is shaped by what you repeatedly consume. Conversations that revolve around blame, media that feeds outrage, and constant exposure to negativity all train your brain to stay in problem mode. Strong minds are selective. They do not avoid reality, but they balance awareness with action. This might mean limiting certain conversations, reducing mindless scrolling, or choosing content that emphasizes growth rather than fear. What you feed your mind daily determines where it goes automatically. Language is another powerful daily influence. The words you use, especially in your inner dialogue, is either reinforce helplessness or agency. Saying, "I'm overwhelmed," signals threat. Saying, "I need to prioritize," signals strategy. The situation may be the same, but the internal response changes completely. I began noticing how often vague language created vague stress. Everything felt heavy because everything sounded heavy. As my language became more precise, my thinking became calmer. Precision reduces emotional noise. Solution-focused thinking also becomes a habit through weekly reflection. Once a week, strong minds step back and review without judgment. They ask 3 questions: what worked, what didn't, and what will I adjust next week? These questions turn life into a process instead of a verdict. Nothing is final. Everything is feedback. Another important habit is lowering the threshold for success. Many people abandon solution-focused thinking because they expect immediate transformation. When results are slow, they assume it isn't working. Strong minds think long-term. They understand that identity changes gradually through consistent behavior. There will be days when you fall back into problem mode. This is not failure. It is part of learning. The real measure of progress is not how often you slip, but how quickly you recover. Each recovery strengthens the habit. One subtle but powerful shift is how you relate to setbacks. Instead of seeing them as proof that something is wrong with you, you see them as signals that adjustment is needed. This removes shame from the process. Shame keeps people stuck. Curiosity keeps them moving. Strong minds also build habits around self-trust. Every time you follow through on a small action, you reinforce the belief that you can rely on yourself. That belief becomes the foundation of confidence. Not loud confidence, but quiet stability. Over time, something changes. Problems still appear, but they no longer dominate your inner world. They take their place alongside options, actions, and learning. Your emotional baseline becomes steadier. Your decisions become clearer. This is what it means to make solution-focused thinking a daily habit. It is not about avoiding pain or pretending everything is fine. It is about meeting life with discipline, clarity, and intention. When this mindset becomes automatic, life does not become easy. It becomes navigable. And that ability, to navigate rather than panic, to respond rather than react, is what allows you to keep moving forward, no matter what appears in your path. As we reach the end of this audiobook, take a moment to notice where your mind is right now. Not what problems still exist, not what still needs fixing, but where your attention is resting. Over the last 60 minutes, you've seen one central truth repeated in many forms. Your life does not move in the direction of your wishes or intentions. It moves in the direction of your focus. We began by exposing the trap of problem-focused thinking, how obsessing over what's wrong quietly drains your energy and keeps you stuck. You learned that constantly replaying problems does not make you responsible or prepared. It makes you exhausted. From there, we explored the real cost of living in that mental state. The loss of clarity, confidence, emotional balance, and forward momentum. You then saw how strong minds approach problems differently. Not by denying pain or pretending everything is fine, but by separating identity from difficulty and asking better questions. Questions that create movement instead of emotional loops. Questions that turn stress into information and pressure into direction. We talked about the power of shifting from complaining to creating solutions, and how language, habits, and daily actions quietly train your brain. You learned that change does not begin with motivation or perfect plans, but with small intentional actions repeated consistently. Actions that send a message to your nervous system that you are capable, not trapped. You learned how to stay in solution mode when life gets hard, when emotions rise and clarity feels distant. Not by suppressing emotion, but by pausing, grounding yourself, and choosing response over reaction. And finally, you saw how solution-focused thinking becomes a habit, a way of living, when practiced daily through simple questions, reflection, and discipline. None of this is about becoming someone else overnight. It is about becoming more intentional with what you already have. Your attention, your energy, your choices. You do not need to eliminate problems to move forward. You only need to stop feeding them with all of your focus. The real value of this audiobook does not come from listening once. It comes from practicing, from noticing the moment your mind drifts toward frustration and gently redirecting it toward action, from asking better questions, from taking one small step when the urge is to freeze. That is where transformation happens, quietly, over time.